My name is Dayna Altman, and I am the founder and creator of Bake It Till You Make It. My mental health journey really began as a child, and I didn't have the language or the words at that point to know and understand what I was feeling was related to struggling with my mental health. I just always felt like I wasn't enough. I never felt good enough or beautiful enough, smart enough, fill in the blank. And I think growing up, I always felt like everyone felt that way. I never really talked about it because I felt like that was something that everyone felt. But looking back, especially knowing my younger self, feeling so alone in those emotions and those feelings, it makes me very sad and drives me forward in the work that I'm doing. I didn't really know that I was struggling with my mental health until I went to college. I definitely had some inklings growing up. I was very focused on school, but it wasn't necessarily about learning. It was more about the idea that if I got a good grade, then that meant I was a good person. In high school, I continued to struggle with both of these things, but I also started to struggle a little bit more with an eating disorder. I didn't really have language for this, and when I was in high school, I was certainly struggling with restriction and with a lot of body image, just a lot of time and mental energy kind of taken up by struggling with my body image and really focused on my eating disorder and the way I looked. Also, when I was in high school, I started to struggle a lot with OCD-like characteristics. I didn't get diagnosed until much later in my life, but looking back, I can see that I struggled a lot as well with different rituals and feeling as though if I completed them, then everything would be okay and I would feel enough. It really came down to that core issue. I ended up going to a college in a neighboring state, Providence College. Grew up in Boston, and that was really the turning point for me. My first time away from home, not having the support that I had in my family. I think that when those guardrails were taken away, things really were extremely difficult for me. I was having multiple panic attacks and didn't even know what was happening to me. Anyone who's had a panic attack before, or maybe they've heard that it feels like you're dying, you don't even know what's happening in your body. And that was my experience. I had some really wonderful friends that brought me to the college counseling center, which is truly a turning point for me. I don't know if I would have been able to find that counseling center on my own, honestly. I started seeing a psychiatrist and was put on medication. In the beginning, medication for me felt really scary. I couldn't really imagine ever feeling comfortable being on medication or telling people I was on medication. Now I talk about it all the time because I feel like it's just been a tool that has helped me so much in my recovery. And why would I deny myself of that? And that therapist diagnosed me with an eating disorder, as well as depression and anxiety, which I would later learn was more of an OCD, less than generalized anxiety disorder. I ended up going into an eating disorder treatment center after my freshman year of college. I had met a mentor through my college dance program. As I shared, I loved acting, singing, and dancing. So I found that at my college as well. And I met this wonderful mentor who had struggled herself and had suggested to me that I seek help. I didn't know that there was help outside of just therapy appointments that maybe someone would go to once a week. This was a program that was like a job. I would go every day, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And I really thought showing up would be enough for me to feel better. I was asked to do some really hard work and looking at my family dynamic and structure and be okay with saying goodbye to my connection with my mom over our eating disorders. And unfortunately, that also coincided with not a great experience in this treatment center. I felt like I wasn't really seen. And so when I was leaving that program, I felt the depression really settled in. There was a lot of feelings of just hopelessness, feeling as though I didn't have anything to look forward to. I happened to meet a new therapist that summer, Kathy, who was wonderful and saw how much I was struggling and sent me to this hospital program, a different one. It was residential. It was also for adolescents. And I was 18 at the time, so I was the oldest person there. But I think that really inspired me because I felt like I could be a role model to everyone who was in the program. At this hospital, I felt completely connected to the staff. I felt connected to my recovery. I felt seen and without shame. And I felt like this was the end of my mental health journey. But really, that wasn't the case. Struggling with your mental health for a lot of people is a lifelong journey. But at that point, I thought going back to college, I could just be a regular student. But this process really, and that mindset really only set me back. I wasn't feeling like I could be honest about the work that I was doing. I also started a nonprofit organization with my sister called The Beautiful Project during this time. And The Beautiful Project was dedicated to talking about body image, body positivity, body neutrality, talking about mental health. We would make these handmade string bracelets and sell them to support different eating disorder foundations. And we also made videos where we had different people share their stories. And it was so powerful. And it felt like it really aligned with everything that I was feeling. I really wanted to be this role model. I wanted to be someone who other people saw that their struggle in them and saw them kind of come out on the other side. That felt really important to me. So when I started The Beautiful Project with my sister and I started to struggle, I didn't feel like I could be honest about it. I can remember different college organizations wanting to interview me, wanting me to speak, and I just couldn't imagine ever speaking openly and honestly at that point. And I think that led to a continuous amount of shame, which also led me to feeling very depressed. I ended up needing to take a medical leave during my second semester sophomore year. I can remember that experience like it was yesterday. I remember I had failed a test in one of my classes, one of my hardest classes. And I just felt like I didn't deserve to live anymore. And I can remember going into the bathroom near my dining hall, because that's where the class was held for whatever reason, and just looked for ways to end my life. And I got very overwhelmed in the process and ended up calling my mom, and she picked me up and I took a medical leave. And that was really challenging. I saw all of my friends on social media living their lives, being normal college, quote unquote, normal college students, and feeling as though I would never have that. I was so embarrassed about where I was, especially because at this point in my life, I felt like I would just be like everyone else. And I wasn't necessarily inspired by the idea of being different. Now that feels very different to me, but at that time, it was incredibly difficult. It was a couple of months until I went into a different hospital program. It was through this experience that I met my therapist, Dayna, who I've now been seeing for the last 12 years, which is crazy to think about. At first, I was a little bit scared of Dayna, I won't lie. She was very intense, but she really believed in me. And I think that our relationship, beyond anything else that I've learned in therapy from her, has been the most healing. She's been a very maternal figure to me. She showed me so much acceptance and love in caring. And she's also taught me that, I had the power all along, that I have these skills that I can call on, and no one can take that away from me. And she can't even do it for me. Like I need to figure that out for myself. And with her guidance, that's been so incredibly helpful and life-changing for me. It was through this program that I felt kind of got the courage to transfer colleges. I couldn't imagine ever going back on that original campus and feeling like a different person as someone who struggled with an eating disorder and with their mental health. And I wanted a fresh start. So I ended up going to Northeastern University in Boston. And right off the bat, that was just like an incredible fit for me. I felt like all of these clubs that I was applying to at my previous college, I was getting rejected from. And as soon as I started at Northeastern, I found my community, I found my people, and everything was really aligning. Not to say that I wasn't struggling with all of what I was struggling with before, the depression, eating disorder symptoms, but it felt a little bit more manageable, and it felt like I could have both. I could live my life and also be in recovery. During my 4th year of college, I decided that I wanted to study abroad. Before my whole mental health journey had unfolded, that was something that was really important to me in college. I never left the country before or experienced a new culture. I can remember going into Dayna's office and talking to her about this, and we had come up with a plan, an idea of where I could go that felt attainable. It wasn't 6 months, it was 10 days, but it was still out of the country, and it was still going to be a life-changing experience. Unfortunately, while I was there, I was sexually assaulted by someone that I was traveling with. And as you can probably imagine, that experience, I felt like, I guess if we're using the baking metaphor, I felt like I dropped just like the batter on the floor. I think that I had worked so hard to understand my mental health struggles, my challenges. And so to have this kind of trauma placed on top of me, on top of this, just felt so challenging, and I really didn't know how I was going to get through it. Talked about going back to the hospital, talked about leaving school to process all of this, but really I was able to move through it through therapy, through a lot of writing, through telling my story, through my community. I'll never forget, I was making this quilt once, and outside of Dayna's office in her waiting room, I was working on this little tie quilt. I do love to craft. And I remember Dayna pointing at the quilt and just saying, like, one day this experience will just be one square on your quilt. It's not going to be the whole thing. And that was so powerful. Clearly, I still remember it so many years later. And I think that's what it's become. I think that it has just become a part of my story. And with that, a year later, I was able to create a second organization that was really focused on supporting survivors of sexual violence, even without telling my own story. At that point, just being able to be an advocate and hear yet again the advocacy, the creativity, the entrepreneurship really saved me in a lot of ways, and it really helped me process that trauma. The following year, I graduated from college, which was such a huge accomplishment. And I think that I've done a lot of really wonderful things that I'm very proud of in my life, but graduating from college will always be on the top of the list because I know how hard I had to work to see that graduation day. I was also really excited because I was going to work back at the hospital that I was treated at. And I felt like this was this full circle moment. I felt like I was going to be able to be on the journey of so many other people who were struggling. And I also thought I would be there for like 50 years till retirement. Instead, I was there for only a few years. But it was through that experience that I recognized that as much as I loved being able to help people individually, my calling is really helping people on a more macro level. So I ended up going back to graduate school back at Northeastern and studied public health. And unfortunately, when I was in grad school, I started to really struggle again. I think for a couple of different reasons, being back in school and seeing a grade and feeling like it was attached to my personhood. I was also going through the end of my first relationship, kind of a perfect storm of events that were really challenging for me, and only to be topped off by a car accident and not having a car in the suburbs after the accident was really challenging. I had no idea how I was going to spend my time, how I was going to be able to connect with others. That is something that has been so important to me and to my journey. That summer, I started baking. I couldn't leave my house, so I decided to bring people to me. I had friends over, we would bake together, and it was nothing crazy, nothing too hard. It was using boxes of cake mix and becoming creative with decorations. It was making brownies together from scratch. And I felt like when I was standing side by side with my friends, I could be honest about how much I was struggling. It was a little bit different than just sitting across from them and bearing my soul. The idea that we could bake together and be connected was so important. And that really gave me this idea to create a mental health cookbook, because if that's how I felt, and I felt so comfortable sharing my mental health story, I just believed that I could help everyone. So that's how Bake It Till You Make It was born. And the idea was to create a cookbook with over 40 people sharing their stories, their mental health stories, whether that was connecting with a family member who might be struggling with their mental health, supporting someone they love with their mental health, or a personal experience, as well as recipes that were important to the person who was sharing. I also included different resource pages because I wanted the book to be more than just something that sat on the shelf. I wanted it to have this kind of broader utility. And it was a couple of years until it came to fruition, but it launched into the world in 2019, in July of 2019. And I really thought that that was kind of the beginning and end of Bake It Till You Make It. I felt so proud of it. I had a book in the world. I always wanted to be an author. I always went into my local Barnes and Noble store and felt like I could see myself on the shelf one day, and here it was in front of me, which was really special. But I started doing these events where I would share my story and bake at the same time. I remember my alma mater, Northeastern University, invited me back to do a book signing, but to share my story while I baked in their test kitchen. It was such a beautiful kitchen. Oh my gosh. I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing. But I felt like using the ingredients as metaphors while I was talking about my story really helped people connect. You know, cracking the egg when I talked about the really difficult times I had in college, or adding semi-sweet chocolate chips to represent bittersweet experiences. And the line after I did that presentation to talk to me was so long. People loved it. And I felt really connected to doing these presentations that I would later call Bake It Till You Make It Live. I started booking presentations, and then the pandemic hit, and like for everyone, kind of had to go back to the drawing board. But I decided to do these Bake It Till You Make It lives virtually. People would bake with me in their own kitchens, and we would have these conversations about mental health, which felt so special because everyone was kind of in their own environment, and yet we were able to connect virtually. It was also during this time I wrote my second book. I was going to turn 30 a couple years later, and I really wanted to document everything that I had been through pre-30. So I created a book called Mix, Melt, Mend, Owning My Story and Finding My Freedom. And this was like Bake It Till You Make It live on paper. It was using a recipe and taking the ingredients, using them as metaphors to share my story. And I continued to share and to put the book in the world. It hasn't been without its challenges. I feel like I have faced a lot of rejection. Bake It Till You Make It to me makes so much sense. But for others, there's definitely not always understanding. And I think that that has led to me at times feeling like, what am I doing? Like, if this isn't universally understood. But I've kept going, and I'm so grateful that I have. I created a third book called A Unifying Blend, a compilation of recipes and stories to celebrate all that makes us human. And this was kind of the second edition book. And in 2022, I felt like things started to really shift and change as I was invited to be a part of the Youth Mental Health Action Forum that was put on by MTV and the Biden-Harris administration. I had the opportunity to speak at the White House, and that put me in some rooms with a lot of people, which was wonderful. And not only were the connections wonderful, I also felt like this was the first time I was really able to take myself seriously. This was something that people understood. I felt seen, I felt connected, and that was so special and really launched me into feeling like I could leave my job in the nonprofit world at the time and do Bake It Till You Make It full time, share my story on behalf of a speakers bureau and agency, write these books. I created a fourth book called Watch Me Rise, Recipes for Bread, Poems for Growth, which is a poetry cookbook. From that, I created an art exhibit called the Watch Me Rise exhibit. So there's been continuous things growing off of each of the Bake It Till You Make It books and events, continuously putting out in the world things that mean something to me. And I think that the way I'm connected to Bake It Till You Make It, I think that's inspiring for others, or at least I hope it is. And I also put at the forefront authenticity in my work. I will share when I'm not doing well. I will share when things feel really difficult. I know how dangerous it was for me when I wasn't authentic. And I think that as scary as being vulnerable can be, it's also brought me some incredible relationships and connections and the work that I'm doing. And for me, turning baking into something that I did when I was stressed and needed connection really helped take a lot of the shame that I had around food. I used to feel like food had to be earned. It had to be, it was full of shame. It was something that we didn't talk about. So really flipping the idea on its head, seeing that food can be celebratory, food is connection, it's community. I always like to say that just because I have found purpose in my mental health journey does not mean that if one is struggling with their mental health, that they have to turn it into a career or find purpose. That has really worked for me, helped my healing so much, but you can live a full life struggling with your mental health, and it can just be that. It can just be a part of you. I'm so lucky to be engaged to a wonderful partner named Sam. And I think Sam has brought so much healing in my own journey. He has really embraced all parts of me and has helped me realize that I don't have to hide, especially in our relationship. When I first started Bake It Till You Make It, I felt as though I couldn't really enjoy it. I think that as much as I loved the process of baking, there was always an element of being afraid of what I was going to bake or try. And there was a lot of fear in the shifting of my body as a result of Bake It Till You Make It. My body has changed a lot. And I also feel like it is in this body that I'm able to change the world. I'm in a body that is empowered and strong and powerful. My mom has been very supportive of Bake It Till You Make It. And she loves to bake. We have baking in our blood. We had a bakery. She always tells me that my ancestors had a bakery, and that is really special because I feel connected to them. I think a lot of people believe that for those who may have been sexually assaulted, that they don't know the person who assaulted them. And that was the case for me. This was someone I was traveling with on my trip. This is someone that I felt connected to, who I had a crush on, who I felt excited about, but that was completely taken advantage of, and betrayed my trust. And that was very challenging, to say the least, and very painful. There was also a lot of confusion after the fact. I didn't realize or recognize the severity of what had happened. It all happened so quickly. After this happened, I had a few more days on the trip. And so I just really avoided that person. And when we got back, he had actually apologized to me, which was interesting because I felt like it was validating that it was as bad as I thought that it was. I just remember saying to him, I just want to go on a date with you, and that was completely taken advantage of. And I appreciated the apology, but certainly doesn't take away the trauma. But it did give me that reassurance that this was not my fault. This was not something that I asked for. And I believe that that is so important for anyone who might be struggling or know someone who's struggling or who's gone through this and has come out on the other side. You are resilient, and you didn't ask for this. It's okay to trust your experience. I hope you do trust your experience and recognize that there is so much support and there are people who want to help you. There are resources. I'm so grateful to have already been in therapy myself to access those resources, but there's crisis hotlines, there's community support, there's support groups. You're not alone. I know how lonely it feels, but you're truly not. And there are so many people who want to help and support you. This is where I am. This is who I am. And I'm really grateful to have created a life and a mission and organizations and books that have reflected the work that I have done and will continue to do. I'm really proud of everything that has made me who I am, despite the very painful challenges. I can imagine I will face a lot of them in the future, but I know that I have the support And I also have the tools within me to recognize that I can come out on the other side. It's really important to me, to anyone watching this, to recognize that they're not alone. That as lonely as these thoughts and feelings and experiences may feel, you are part of the human race. You're part of this community, and you're truly not alone. That it is truly worth it to reach out and to find support, to find healing. For me, I have found so much healing and purpose in creating a life that has revolved around my mental health story. But if you're not there yet, or if you don't think that that is something that you want to do, that is completely okay. And you can live a life that is full, and one where you struggle with your mental health. That doesn't have to be a career, or it doesn't have to be your calling. If it is, welcome to the club. I'm so happy to have you. But if not, that's okay too. And it doesn't make your experiences any less valid, and it doesn't make you any less alone.